Last night on national television, something remarkable occurred. A normal political debate turned suddenly into a stunning moment no one anticipated. Congresswoman Jasmine Crockett, in a single masterful stroke, turned the tables and left Senator J.D. Vance speechless. What followed was not simply an ordinary political exchange. It was a wake-up call to the political class that would be felt for decades to come. The argument had been raging, economic policy being the subject, and the two sides were adhering to their traditional talking points. Then, in a move that left everyone present in the room and millions at home speechless, Crockett nonchalantly produced a document from her folder, something none in the room were anticipating, not even Vance himself. "Before I address your accusations of government entitlement programs," she started, "I'd like to provide you with just one example from your home state." The mood changed in an instant. The entire studio was plunged into a tense silence. You could sense the tension in the room shift. What Vance did next didn't just shock Vance. It created a burst of applause from the audience, shattering the strict no-reaction rules of the forum. Even the moderator, who is normally swift to revive order, was stunned, held in the weight of the moment. Crockett's precedent did not merely refute Vance's rhetoric, it destroyed it, slicing through decades of political jargon with irrefutable facts and inescapable clarity. This wasn't merely a debate victory, it was an American moment. If you're sick of hearing the same tired talking points about economic policy and poverty, hit that subscribe button and like. This was not only a debate, it was a specific calling out of the way we discuss poverty and opportunity in America. What unfolded next was truly historic, and the world is still discussing it. But why did this live TV exchange go viral, garnering more than 20 million views in less than 24 hours? To appreciate the significance of this moment, we must first examine the participants here, Senator J.D. Vance and Congresswoman Jasmine Crockett, and the stakes of their live TV showdown. Senator J.D. Vance, 41, is used to being in the limelight. He became famous with his best-selling memoir Hillbilly Elegy, a book that chronicles his journey from a struggling, working-class family in Ohio to Yale Law School and beyond. His personal story of overcoming adversity through hard work and perseverance has been the cornerstone of his political identity. When he campaigned for Senate, his message was straightforward. Hard work and individual responsibility are the pathways to success. Government handouts, he believed, only lead to dependency. Since his election, Vance has been a zealous critic of the handout mentality, voting to cut government assistance programs and contending that the programs are a discouragement to self-sufficiency. In a recent interview on Fox News, he famously declared, "I grew up surrounded by poverty, and what I saw was that government programs trapped people in dependency rather than lifting them toward self-sufficiency." This worldview has become the focus of his political rhetoric. But here's the twist. Congresswoman Jasmine Crockett utterly disagrees. Crockett, a second-term member of Congress from Texas, offers a radically different worldview. A former civil rights lawyer, Crockett cut her teeth battling systemic injustice and fighting on behalf of marginalized groups. Her background working in the trenches of social justice concerns has informed her economic policy outlook. As opposed to most politicians who depend so much on ideological rhetoric, Crockett never comes with anything but data and actual examples. Her rhetorical approach is rooted in the everyday life of her constituents, providing tangible evidence to back up her stance on economic opportunity and social justice. The National Economic Policy Forum, sponsored by one of the major networks and aired prime time, provided the ideal setting for this high-stakes conversation. As worries over economic disparity continue to escalate in the U.S., as record levels of wealth disparity have been indicated in studies, the discussion of government aid programs was more topical than ever. The convention was a chance to delve deep into these matters and listen to the lawmakers who have written the legislation that impacts millions of Americans. What the crowd was unaware of was that Crockett had come to the forum more prepared than usual. While most of the other forum-goers used generic talking points, Crockett had spent weeks accumulating in-depth information from Senator Vance's home state of Ohio. She interviewed citizens of his former town and amassed uncontestable evidence that directly opposed his claims of government aid. Crockett wasn't concerned with ideological battles, she explained to her staff beforehand. Tonight is about real people and real results. Occasionally, one good example can pierce ours. Rhetoric. As the forum approached its second hour, the moderator guided the discussion to government welfare programs. Senator Vance, ever assured, began to launch into his impassioned criticism of what he refers to as the handout mentality. "Look, I've seen this firsthand," he said. "Government dependency doesn't lift people up, it holds them down. What truly changes lives is personal responsibility and hard work, not endless government programs." That was when the moderator addressed Congresswoman Crockett. The audience waited for what would become the most discussed moment of the night. The camera closed in on Crockett and the tension in the audience changed. The audience, which until then had been pretty muted, sensed that something was going to take place. "Thank you, moderator," Crockett started out, her voice steady and unshaken. "Senator Vance, I have heard your point clearly, and I admire your background. But tonight, I would like to get past anecdotes to fact." She turned slightly towards Vance directly, tension in the air. "You've used your own childhood in Middletown, Ohio, consistently as proof that government support leads to dependency, not opportunity. But I've spent time looking at the actual data from your hometown, and I'd like to share just one example that might challenge that narrative." Vance, confident as always, nodded. This was his familiar turf. He'd built a career on this very argument. But Crockett wasn't fazed. She opened a folder on the desk in front of her, a calm yet determined look on her face. What she would say next would leave Vance speechless, but the entire audience enthralled. Keep reading, because you won't believe what she exposed next. The room was charged with tension. Crockett, composed and unflinching, turned the page before unveiling the next segment of her game-altering case. "Here's the one I really want to emphasize," she stated, her voice slicing through the dense hush. And with that, she plunged into an anecdotal narrative, one that visibly flustered Senator J.D. Vance. "I just talked to Mrs. Eleanor Jenkins," Crockett went on, her voice lingering. Her mention of the name caused Vance's face to change subtly. A flash of awareness crossed his eyes before it was gone. This was no normal conversation. Mrs. Jenkins, now 78, had been a lunchroom supervisor at Vance's grade school, and what she remembered from those times contained something that no one anticipated to hear. "She told me something remarkable," Crockett said, locking eyes with Vance. "Before the expanded school meal program, many children, yourself included, Senator, would skip lunch to avoid using meal tickets that marked them as receiving assistance. There it was." Crockett wasn't simply presenting statistics. She was presenting a direct, irrefutable link to Vance's own biography. She didn't rest there. Once the program was implemented, attendance and grades were up. The stigma disappeared. Children were treated equally at last. "And you, Senator, from skipping meals to being a regular in the lunch line once the program was initiated." The studio became utterly silent. All eyes were on Vance. His bold mask had cracked, but Crockett wasn't finished yet. "Mrs. Jenkins remembered you very well, Senator," she went on. "And her records indicate that your name was on the list of students whose academic gains were measurable after this program. This was not political posturing. This was a personal challenge, straight out. And it did more than make Vance hesitate. It left him at a loss for words. But Crockett wasn't going to let the moment pass. "You voted last month against the School Nutrition Enhancement Act," she continued, her tone smooth but unyielding. "This bill would have extended the same universal meal programs to schools across the country, programs like the one that assisted you." The air was heavy with tension now. Crockett allowed the contradiction to linger in the air, letting Vance's own words say more than any campaign speech. "Senator Vance," she stated with laser-sharp accuracy, "you profited from the very kind of government aid you currently vote to withhold from other children." It was a devastating moment, but Crockett's strategy was never to go after Vance personally. No. Her tone was still respectful, circumspect, but the gravity of her example was immovable. She wasn't politicking. She was pushing against the very core of Vance's argument, with a fact-checked example directly opposite his tale. "My question is easy," Crockett went on, her tone steady but sharp. "How do you justify your votes against initiatives like the one that assisted you, when data from your own district indicates it produced better results that, by your own testimony, helped make you successful yourself?" The moderator, feeling the gravity of the moment, let the question hang in the air. The tension built, and for the first time of the evening, it was apparent Vance had no simple response. Vance, who had who had Vance's the thing. Vance had done things that were the mediums adjusters, efficient tension at bound, and for the first time of the evening, it was apparent in Sidney's enthusiastic response. Vance's doubt attention melts, and Vance's attention, Vance's of Vance's levity. Vance announced a simple response. Vance sifted his things. Vance simple as a fact. A quick wit and authoritative answers was taken aback for a moment. He began to speak with his mouth open, but hesitated, clearly trying to think of the words. A few seconds dragged on for what seemed like hours. When he did finally say something, his usual assurance was missing. "Well, the conditions were different at that time," he stuttered. "The programs today are not the same." And the fiscal realities, but Crockett wasn't going to let her have it. "I'm sorry to interrupt," she interrupted his reply with the skill of a surgeon, "but the bill you voted against last month was fashioned directly after the Middletown program. It was drafted according to the same principles of universal access that ended the stigma in your community." With that, she produced a copy of the bill, marking the important parts. "Page 17, Section 3, she exclaimed, holding it up for everyone to see. "It specifically mentions Middletown as an example of success. The design of this program is the same as the one that assisted you." The camera zoomed in on the face of Vance. His confidence wavered, and the inconsistency in his stance was now glaring. He had spent a lifetime espousing the virtue of self-sufficiency and decrying government support, but here was the quantitative evidence that such programs did not lead to dependency. They produced opportunity. Vance shifted uncomfortably in his seat. I'd need to review the specific provisions," he muttered, his voice now hesitant. "There are always complexities in legislation that don't translate well to real-world implementation." Crockett, unfazed, pressed on. "The bill is only 24 pages long, Senator. But my point isn't about political gotchas. It's about consistency. It's about evidence-based policy." Then she addressed the larger audience, her voice firm. "When we speak of government support, we're not speaking of theoretical programs. We're speaking of actual programs that impact actual lives. Middletown data indicates carefully crafted nutrition support did not lead to dependency. It led to opportunity." This was no longer about political sound bites. This was about facts. This was about actual, tangible results. And Crockett's measured but firm presentation revealed the hypocrisy in Vance's stance in a way that no one could get around. What followed brought the debate to an entirely new level. The moderator, sensing the seriousness of the exchange, interrupted Vance to ask him a question that would become a turning point. "Senator Vance, would you like to respond to the specific example Congresswoman Crockett has raised?" For an instant, Vance resembled a man on the verge of rethinking everything he had just stated. "Look," he started, trying to get back on track. "We can cherry-pick examples all day long. The broader issue is the culture of dependency." But before he could complete, the moderator interrupted him, not allowing him to sidestep the question. "Senator, the Congresswoman has put forward particular facts regarding a program in your home city that specifically contradicts your stance. Can you address that particular instance?" The studio crowd leaned forward, recognizing an unusual moment in political debates, one in which a politician was being compelled to own up to the fact of his own words. Vance hesitated, clearly rethinking his strategy. "I thank the Congresswoman for her study of Middletown's past," he said, his tone less assured than usual. "There were definitely some successful programs to be found at that time. But my issue is with the overall culture. But Crockett wasn't going to let him get away. "Senator, this isn't about sweeping cultural assertions. This is about particular policy. You've used your individual experience as proof that government aid isn't effective. But when you're presented with documented facts that such aid helped your own neighborhood, you haven't responded to the contradiction." She went on, her tone firm but polite. "If the Middletown program succeeded, as the evidence indicates, why vote against instituting similar programs across the country? This has nothing to do with politics. It's what works in helping children thrive." The audience, which had been instructed to remain silent, could no longer hold back. Spontaneous applause erupted, echoing through the studio. The moderator made a brief attempt to restore order, but quickly relented as the applause continued for nearly 30 seconds. And then something really surprising occurred. Vance, the guy famous for his quick retorts and strategic speeches, changed gears. "You know what?" he said, his voice softer, more contemplative. "You've obviously done your homework, Congresswoman, and you're correct. The Middletown program was successful. I haven't made those connections to my recent votes, and that's a legitimate challenge." For a moment, the studio was stunned into silence. When was the last time anyone had seen a politician admit a contradiction so openly, so directly? It was a rare moment of vulnerability, one that caught everyone off guard. Vance went on, his voice now colored with what appeared to be real feeling. "Mrs. Jenkins, she was really a figure in my early school days. I haven't given those lunch programs any thought in years, but they were significant." He paused, his voice heavy with reflection. "There were days when that school lunch was the most reliable meal I'd get. And you're right, when they changed to the universal program, it removed the stigma. It was a surprising confession, one that shifted the mood of the room." And as Vance went on, the crowd sensed the gravity of the moment. For the first time, it seemed as though the political script was being rewritten in front of them. The air was heavy with expectation as Congresswoman Jasmine Crockett respectfully nodded, sensing the gravity of the moment. This wasn't about humiliating Senator J.D. Vance. No, Crockett had a much greater purpose. She was here to change the narrative, to redefine the debate, to bring the spotlight from hollowed-out political jargon and onto one unshakable reality. Evidence ought to inform policy, not ideology. "Thank you, Senator," she started, her voice firm but strong. "My argument is not that all government programs are perfect or that personal responsibility is okay. It's that our choices regarding which programs to fund need to be based on evidence, not ideology." As she finished speaking, the mood in the studio seemed to suspend on her words. This was not a political discussion. It was a moment of clarity, one that would redefine the national conversation about poverty, government help, and opportunity in America. Middletown data indicates that properly structured help programs can indeed lead to the very self-reliance we supposedly all believe in, she went on, her words cutting through the air. But Crockett had more to say. The moderator, catching the shift in the tone, broke from the traditional bounds of the forum time constraints. "Congresswoman, you said you talked to Middletown residents. Did you hear anything else pertinent to this conversation?" Crockett's eyes flashed with determination. "Yes," she said, producing another paper, her movements calculated. "I met with Dr. Robert Putnam, who did exhaustive research on Middletown for his work on social capital. He discovered that this universal meal program didn't only enhance nutrition, it reduced the divisions among children. Teachers experienced improved classroom harmony, improved cooperation. These soft results were equally as important as the academic results. They made a more effective learning place for all." She pushed a graph down the table, displaying the striking spike in attendance levels. "The figures are unmistakable," Crockett stated firmly. Chronic absenteeism fell by 23% in the 2 years following the implementation of the program. Teachers logged a 30% decrease in afternoon behavioral issues. These weren't figures on a page. These were actual children, actual families. Crockett wasn't arguing for a policy. She was demonstrating how the program had altered lives. She turned back to Vance, her gaze unshaken. Senator, your book, Hillbilly Elegy, eloquently described how the breakdown of community in your hometown affected opportunities. The data suggests these universal programs helped rebuild that very community cohesion during your school years. The social capital you've written about was actually strengthened by government intervention. For the first time during the debate, Vance shifted forward, no longer guarded in his posture. His customary political swagger seemed to dissipate, replaced by serious engagement. The program did take away some barriers, he acknowledged, his voice reflective. I recall there was less of a difference between children after that adjustment. Exactly, Crockett said. And that's exactly what the present law you opposed last month does: eliminate barriers and stigma and make sure that kids can concentrate on learning, not on hunger. The Middletown data demonstrates that this works. She turned back to the bill she had mentioned previously, showing side-by-side photographs of the original Middletown program documents and the bill that had just passed. The most important provisions were appallingly similar: universal eligibility to make it stigma-free, nutrition standards founded on the same studies, and an identical timeline for implementation. The only distinction was real: scope. The scope of the program, how far it would extend. And that's when something remarkable occurred on live TV. What had started out as a political fray, a war of talking points, had escalated into something greater, something authentic. The viewers, who had prepared themselves for the usual political sparring, were now seeing a meaningful, fact-based exchange regarding policy efficacy. It was in this instant that the unthinkable occurred. An older man in the front row, a retired school administrator from Pennsylvania, stood up, going against the forum's strict rules. I had a similar program in my district, he said, his voice stern and determined. The Congresswoman is correct. Those programs work. We saw the same effects: better attendance, improved performance. And then, one by one, other people in the audience rose from their seats, each lending gravity to Crockett's case. A school nurse, an active teacher, a parent volunteer. Each of their accounts further supported the information Crockett had shared. The room, previously polarized along party lines, was now one in acknowledgement of a deeper reality. The forum had moved beyond its typical political theatrics. This was not a case of one side winning over the other. It was a case of a moment of clarity, a breakthrough on how we deal with policies that impact the most vulnerable members of our society. The moderator, known for her strict neutrality, seemed almost moved by the unexpected turn of events. In my 20 years of moderating political discussions, she said, her voice tinged with reflection, I'm not sure I've ever witnessed an exchange with this level of substantive impact. We've moved beyond talking points to something more meaningful. And then, as the debate was coming to a close, the moderator asked, before we take our break, would either of you like to add any final thoughts on this topic? Vance, even though obviously flustered, tried to shift. I thank the Congresswoman for bringing forth this particular example. Although I still have issues with the way that government support is structured, I do believe that this discussion has made me realize how the need to examine particular outcomes as opposed to wide generalities, including mine, hastens things along. For a fleeting instant, Vance's words lingered. He was conceding the primacy of evidence over ideology, a thing the usually polarized political world rarely hears. Crockett nodded in agreement, her tone firm and calm. Thank you, Senator. I think this is how government is supposed to operate, reviewing evidence, recognizing what programs do in actuality in people's lives, and being open to revising our positions when confronted by new facts. That isn't weakness. It's how we arrive at better policy. The show broke into a short commercial, but the audience, now thoroughly stirred by the unprecedented moment of political candor, came to its feet in prolonged applause. It wasn't partisan support. It wasn't winning versus losing. It was an appreciation of the strength of honest interaction with fact, as opposed to ideology. Some members of the audience were spotted with tears, moved by the watershed in an era in which partisan chasm seemed unavoidable. What ensued was nothing less than a viral phenomenon. In short order, snippets of the debate were broadcast on social media outlets. trending statewide on the hashtags #Middletown example and #Crockett receipts. The debate had gone viral, but it wasn't so much the theatrics of the encounter that people were watching. It was the raw power of the argument, the unshakable facts that were being shared, debated, and discussed. Large news organizations, instead of dwelling on the personalities involved, started looking into the Middletown program that had been mentioned by Crockett. The Columbus Dispatch ran a long feature story called The Middletown Miracle, exploring the success of the school program and how it had left a lasting legacy in the community. Even conservative commentators, such as columnist David Brooks, wrote, "Whatever one's politics, Congresswoman Crockett's approach deserves respect." Rather than on abstract arguments, she presented particular evidence regarding a particular program with quantifiable results. This is the way policy debates must work. What had begun as a normal partisan debate had grown into a national dialogue concerning the actual effect of government welfare programs. For Senator Vance, this dialogue was both challenge and opportunity. Could he square his political mythology with the facts presented to him? Only time would tell. Only 3 days following the historic exchange in the forum, something astounding took place, something that most politicians wouldn't dare to do. Senator J.D. Vance, a staunch proponent of refusing government help, wrote a more introspective reply in the Wall Street Journal. It was a welcome sight in the current political arena, and one that could alter the course of future discussions. "While I hold my reservations regarding government dependency," Vance wrote, "Congresswoman Crockett had a legitimate point of inconsistency that should be given respectful consideration rather than dismissive derision." The language itself was a major change. Vance had admitted that Crockett's argument that the Middletown program's results were good was accurate. It wasn't political appeasement. It was a real reconsideration of his position. And in a world of bitter partisan warfare, that kind of vulnerability was shocking. Political commentators were quick to catch on to this subtle reaction. "Vance isn't giving up his essential stance," observed political scientist Norman Ornstein, "but he's admitting that facts count in today's political landscape. That's refreshingly refreshing." That simple phrase, modest though it was a watershed moment, not so much for Vance, but for the nature of politics itself. For Congresswoman Crockett, the platform had already surpassed raising her national profile. It had turned a budding political star into a voice of serious policy. Colleges, policy groups, and think tanks started to invite her to talk about evidence-based solutions to economic mobility. Thousands of messages poured into her office from constituents from all over the political spectrum, congratulating her for the capacity to break through the typical partisan din and emphasize facts above ideology. The Washington Post editorial board nailed Crockett's approach exactly. What Congresswoman Crockett showed wasn't partisan politics. It was the all-too-rare art of evidence-based policy analysis. She didn't merely take on an opponent. She took on the whole system of political discourse that so readily skips over hard facts for empty rhetoric. And the ripple effects were immediate. A number of leading news networks vowed to have a Middletown standard for upcoming political forums. Participants would be expected to give actual examples and facts to support their statements. No more phony talking points. No more ambiguous generalities. Facts would be the basis of political discussion. But the surprises didn't end there. Only 2 weeks following the forum, Vance made an unannounced visit to Middletown, Ohio, his hometown. It was his first return visit in a number of years, and the local press took special interest. He sat down with Mrs. Jenkins and other retired teachers to talk about the school lunch program that Crockett had stressed. Although the meetings were shut to cameras, the attendees characterized them as truly curious. Vance wasn't there for a photo opportunity. He was there to learn. The trip was a turning point. After the trip, Vance co-sponsored an amendment to a bill that would provide funding for a pilot program based on the Middletown model, doubling it in 50 school districts nationwide. This amendment wasn't party politics or political win. It was about recognizing that, at times, government assistance programs, when well designed to maintain dignity and provide opportunity, can truly matter. And what was most astonishing? Congresswoman Crockett signed on with Vance as a Democratic co-sponsor of the bill. "This isn't about political wins," she said. "It's about good policy rooted in evidence, not ideology. I appreciate Senator Vance's openness to working with the data, despite our other partisan differences." 6 months later, the pilot program was enacted as part of a broader education bill, and political analysts started to see the Crockett-Vance exchange as the spark that ignited what The Atlantic referred to as a small but significant outbreak of evidence-based governance. For regular Americans, this dialogue was something of a rarity in contemporary politics, an instance in which concrete facts and recorded results trumped partisan talking points. The forum didn't resolve every political disagreement between Crockett and Vance, but it demonstrated that serious consideration of evidence could on occasion bridge the traditional political divides. One Middletown citizen put it just right: "I don't care which party has good ideas. I care about what really works." We need more of these kinds of conversations based on actual results rather than constantly fighting. Jump forward a year from the exchange, and Stanford. Researchers released a full-scale study of universal school meal programs. Their conclusion? They verified what Crockett had maintained all along. These programs, as long as they were executed without stigma, always enhanced academic performance and, rather than causing dependency, frequently resulted in higher economic mobility. The study singled out the Crockett-Vance exchange as a turning point in injecting evidence into an increasingly ideological policy debate. The most poignant of them all was when Crockett got a handwritten letter from an East Texas girl. "I saw you discuss school lunch with Senator Vance. I have free lunch at my school. Thank you for making me feel that it is okay." If this tale has encouraged you to place a premium on facts and evidence when discussing politics, don't just sit there. Press that like button and subscribe to our channel. We deliver you content that cuts through the typical political den, going deep into substantial meaning. And while you're doing that, do tell in the comments, have you ever seen one of those moments where someone's line of thinking changed, not due to opinions, but because of tough, tangible evidence? Your experiences are invaluable to us as we construct a culture that prizes substance over sound bites. This is the future of politics, a future where evidence prevails over ideology. Join us in creating that future.